grab one. This is also a reminder that when we do these programs on different topics, please go to the library website and register. We are technically capped in this room, but it's Thanksgiving, so we're just going to squeeze in.
Fire Marshal is not here, right? He's coming this week.
Yeah, you heard me say that. Although Dana's filming. The other thing I wanted to let you know, since we started going to a year-round calendar at y'all's request, we're actually going to be doing a December program. The fourth Thursday at 5:30, which is our normal time frame, falls smack dab in between Christmas and New Year's. We have a lot of folks who don't travel anymore, and a lot of folks who will have more family in town. So we are really excited to do something on the 28th of December at 5:30 in this space. Jared Abdullah, who manages outreach and education at the James K. Polcom in Columbia, is going to be talking about Christmas traditions, specifically Victorian Christmas traditions, which actually are a lot of the ones that we've carried over, including, I think, the Christmas tree. He will also probably talk a little bit about the Polk family. James K. obviously was a Polk, and his father, but the Polks as a family were very prolific in the early history of Murray County and had land grants in Spring Hill. The 4 original land grants for Spring Hill came together at roughly Duplex and Main Street, where the Methodist Church is on one side and the Episcopal's on the other. So hopefully Jaron will share a little bit about the Polk family as well. But please put that on your calendar. I know it's a tough time of year, but we wanted to be able to offer something to those of us who decide not to venture into airports or roads or in cars or whatever. I want to let Dana say a little bit about the library and what's going on at the library. Looking at me like I'm crazy. And then we're going to let Naomi Deary talk a little bit about Friends for those who are not familiar with it.
I'm not sure what y'all want to know. I hope you all subscribe to our calendar. That should come in your email. Let us know if you're not getting that. It's packed full of events. We're doing at least 2 a day. It's like we are doing probably the most clever programming in the state. And we have 2 programmers, but they do these amazing things. Something that some of you might be interested in that a lot of you are already participating in, we're doing a program with Boys and Girls Club where we're having 3rd graders who are struggling, well actually no, K to 4, who maybe are struggling with reading to read aloud to us. And we are there to just cheer them on and get them ready and excited about reading again so that when they take their TCAPs at the end of the year, that they can be promoted to the next grade. So if you're interested in that, let me know as soon as possible because we're doing orientations probably next week.
It's a really exciting opportunity that Dana has been working on for a long time to get into the schools and be able to do this. So,
Boys and Girls Club has been just spectacular.
Naomi?
Just want to tell y'all, the Friends, that's our Christmas tree that we decorated. Everybody else decorated, I didn't. But anyway, we're going to hit 20,000 that we're raising in our book sales and what we raised back at the permanent book sale this year. We raised over right at 11,000 on the quarterly book sales and the private sale, and then the independent that Gail helps us with. This woman is amazing. She touches every item y'all donate and goes through them to sort them and everything. We're almost 8,000 and we're not done yet.
I'm testing the sound.
They're trying really hard to get the books off the bottom shelf because the volunteers are paying my age bracket. They can get down there, but they can't get back up. But now, again, if I got this right, and it's not just the Friends, it's the people in this community that donate their time here. It equals 2 full-time people, and you all don't know how that helps with budget. And so we're going to try to work with her on some other things that she needs for the library, maybe some computers and some books and stuff. But we're here, and we hope that if you're not a member, who goes to the quarterly book sale? Okay, if you're a member, you can come on Friday night, and you get the first book, and there's not near the crowd. But anyway, welcome y'all here, and there's applications out front. This is a great program. I hope y'all enjoy it. Thank you.
I want to share a little bit of a story about the library that Dana hasn't heard yet. I was at a local small business mother and son came in. The son was clearly distracted, maybe 9 or 10. And the person across the counter and I started talking about the library and about the history programs and the chess programs. And he was particularly interested in a cross stitch that someone had done of a cow that was on the floor, on the countertop, and explained that he really liked art. And his mother said, I've had trouble finding art classes for him because he's fairly young. The lady across the counter and I both said, have you been to the library? Well, I live in Murray County. Yeah. Then go to the library. Go Google it. I got a text from her a couple days ago that her son has signed up for like 4 programs. That's what this library does in terms of programming. It's not just for all of us and the kids that are here as well. It's for the whole community. It's always been about the community. So please take the time to share that with our illustrious board of mayor and aldermen. And also remember to check it out for your kids and your grandkids. Even if they're here over the holidays, if there's space in the programs, they'll do it. Figure it out. If there's not, we'll get the fire marshal in and pick it up. All right, on that note, Mr. Stanfill, you're up. I think I woke him up.
Oh my goodness. I love being called Mr. I have been called a doctor. At one of these, I don't think we had half as many people here. I got introduced as Dr. Stanfill. And I said, I do appreciate that, but I do not have a doctorate in anything. I do have a Tennessee State driver's license. That counts. But thank you for that. But I do want to thank everybody for coming in tonight, giving the night up before Thanksgiving to go out and hear a little bit of the history of the Civil War that took place here in Spring Hill. A lot of people think it was just a small skirmish. Really was, but there was a lot of lives lost here. And a lot of things transpired here that could have possibly not led to the rest of the things that went on in Franklin and Nashville. I'm no big time historian. I'm going to give you just a little quick how I got into this. When I was a kid, I was probably around 4 years old, maybe, it was just before starting elementary school. I lived here in Spring Hill, and there was a Civil War parade, and evidently they was having a reenactment. I do not know what was going on because they had soldiers on horses, pulling cannons and everything, and me and one of my good friends and her grandfather was in a small wagon pulled by a billy goat, and I was standing in the back of it with a flag holding it up, and I was in that parade. So I have kind of got that in my blood since I was that young, living here in Spring Hill, and that really didn't get me into it, but that's just a little bit on my side. I got into it the first time that I dug a bullet, and I'm going to tell you where it was, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give you what I know about this area. The first time I dug a bullet, my brother-in-law took me out metal detecting with him, and I'm like, what is this metal detecting? What are you talking about here? He said, just come on, get in the truck. We're going to ride, and I'm going to show you a little something and see if you like it or not. And he was walking around, only had one metal detector, and he is swinging it back and forth. And all of a sudden, I hear a boom, 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 and he dug his shovel into the ground and popped it up and pulled a bullet out. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. You got one. Where's mine? He gives me the metal detector, and he says, now you go. And the whole time he's over my left wing, and I'm swinging that machine as best I could. And I'm like, he's like in the background saying, don't you miss that bullet. Don't you miss that bullet, because you miss it by that much. And all of a sudden, boom, boom. And he said, dig it up. And I dug it up. That was my first bullet. And I'll tell you right now where it was. And I told a few of you earlier up here talking with you. I found that if you go over to the crossings where the Coles building is, you go into the inside of Coles, go back to the far right corner of Coles, and that's the first bullet that I ever dug was in the back right side of Coles. And of course, everything else is covered up right there. But real quick now, we're going to jump off into it, and I do appreciate everybody coming. I love having the kids, the young people in the crowd, because they're the ones that's going to keep this history going. And if we ever forget it, we might as well just rip the pages out of history books and throw them away and forget about it. But the youngsters are the ones that's going to remember it. And, you know, they're the next generation. And I've tried to get kids. There's one gentleman in here tonight that I took him metal detecting for his first time, and all he got to dig was coins. But I wanted him to understand how that metal detector worked. But real quick, we're going to jump right into this, and I'll do a little Q&A after the fact. Does anybody in here, and I know there's a few, and I know a few faces in here that know really what happened here and what happened before it actually, the main battle come to Spring Hill on the 29th of November in 1864. How many of you know anything at all about it? Please raise your hand. Okay, so that's less than half the crowd. Don't be Dr. Google. Check it out, but Google does have a lot of good stuff on there. Now, the general of the Confederate Army was battling with the general of the Union Army in Georgia. Union Army was General Sherman. Confederate Army was General John Bell Hood. And he stayed in Atlanta, defended at Chickamauga, the Battle Above the Clouds and Lookout Mountain in Chattanooga, pushed down into Atlanta, tried to take Atlanta, keep Atlanta in the Confederacy's hands. The Sherman brought his troops down. General Hood said, hey, we don't want nothing to happen to Atlanta. We want to get you outside of Atlanta and get you on the outskirts. And as Hood brought his troops out, he burned a lot of the military depots that would have bullets, guns, anything stored in there that they could not carry with them, burned them, and got out of there and tried his best to get General Sherman to come out of Atlanta and fight. And if you've read some history books, that's where I get a lot of my knowledge from that area, is from the books that I've read. And I've got a lot of books, and I went through them thanks to a few people in here. And they tell a lot. The history books don't lie. And you don't realize it until you really get into it and start reading it, and you go, wow, this is really, it really happened. But Schofield brought his troops out of Atlanta, out of the town, and tried to get Sherman to come out and fight him. And this was in September of 64. Around, I want to say maybe the 5th, 6th of September, somewhere right in there, in kind of the fall. And Sherman would not do that. He would not come out and fight it. He thought he was going to be overpowered. He sent a few small scouts out to engage, but they always got pushed right back. And all of a sudden, Hood said, well, you're not going to come fight me, the Army of the Tennessee. So we're going to go march from Atlanta into North Georgia, through North Georgia, through West North Alabama, East North Alabama, and then we're gonna come up and we're gonna take Nashville, Tennessee, which was one of the main supply depots for the Union Army. Well, at that time, when Sherman decided he was gonna burn Atlanta down, that's why they call it Hot Atlanta, by the way. A lot of people don't realize that. And I was talking to a gentleman today from Atlanta and talking to him about it, and he said, I just thought it was because it was hot down there in the summertime. And I'm like, no. And he says, I gotta check that out. And I said, you do that. And I said, you ask anybody that is originally from Atlanta, and they're old school Atlanteans, and they don't like to hear it called Atlanta because Sherman burned it down. When Sherman burned Atlanta, he headed to the Atlantic Ocean. General Hood headed this way. He hit Florence, Alabama. He come across the Tennessee River in Florence on pontoons. And I'm not talking about a pontoon boat like you'd have up on the lake and ride around and fish off of and enjoy the day. It was boats with a bridge built across it, and they all floated. So he brought his troops across it, all of his wagons, his artillery, the cannons, they all come across that Tennessee River. There wasn't no dams back then, so it really wasn't that big, that deep, that wide. So he was able to get across there, and he started coming up into Tennessee. When he got across the river, got all his troops together, formed them up, and said, we're marching seriously to Nashville, and this is the way we're going to do it. He sent some of his troops to the east, some of them to the west. A lot of them come straight up through Pulaski. A lot of them come through some other smaller towns that you probably don't even know of, and they just done a march. And a lot of people think, well, a march is just a bunch of soldiers lined up together marching. These marches were sometimes 1.5 miles, 2 miles wide, because they didn't want to be outflanked to the left or to the right. They wanted somebody out there to cover them as they was on their march. Well, they hit a little bit in Pulaski, and then ended up coming into Columbia. And when they got to Columbia, Schofield, the general for the Union, had a lot of his troops there. And he said, hey, we're going to abandon this place. We're getting out of here. We're overwhelmed. And I don't know the count of exactly how many troops General Hood had with him, but it was a massive amount of troops that he had with him. And when they come up through there, General Schofield decided he's abandoned Columbia. There was a fort down there. If anybody's been to Columbia, you can go to the fort. There's a big monument up there, but Schofield blew the fort up. And they started headed towards Spring Hill. They come into Spring Hill the 29th of November. Now you got to remember, these roads wasn't paved roads. Didn't have cell phones, didn't have no communications, except for running back and forth to each other and talking, sending messages back and forth. Well, they hit that area there after it was blown up, started moving towards Spring Hill. And they moved as quickly as they could. General Hood came into Columbia. He split his forces up. Nathan Bedford Forrest. Everybody know who that is? The Union called him the devil himself. They called him the devil himself because when he led a charge, it was on. He was a cavalryman. He rode horse, and his troops were really a force to be reckoned with. General Hood sent Mr. Forrest to the west, come down 431 off at Hughes Mill on the Duck River. Well, of course, Schofield had broke some of his troops away and to come up the same way, which is 431 today. That would be the highway that they would have come up, 431, if you know that Franklin Pike from back then. Of course, it was a dirt road. And they was just going up through there skirmishing the whole way, and the Confederate troops were trailing a little bit behind, and Hood left a lot of his, if not all of his infantry, artillery, behind, and they were shooting shells at the Union troops to think they were just, overwhelming and bombarding them, and they was set up, and, they wasn't advancing and attacking or anything like that. But all of a sudden, they realized, they were coming after us. And we were going, the Union was moving as quickly as they could up 31 to get here to Spring Hill. General Wilson with the Union on 431, General Schofield, General, bringing them right in here to Spring Hill. Now, like I said, these roads wasn't paved. They were muddy. They were, you couldn't hardly pass them, much less with a horse and buggy and cannons being pulled behind you, much less walking and stomping through the mud. So a lot of the troops spread out through there, and they were actually walking in the fields, which was probably worse than walking on the roads. Probably lost a lot of boots, but at least they had boots. The Union did. The Confederates, on the other hand, they might not have had a boot. They might have had their feet wrapped up with nothing but burlap. Just any kind of rags, any kind of thing they could put on their feet to walk with, to keep their feet warm. When they got in to this area, the U.S. had already set up a perimeter around Spring Hill. Everybody know where the little park is over here that they call the Civil War battlefield? All of Spring Hill was a battlefield. It wasn't just that section. That's one section that the Congress, give me somebody, thank you. Confederate, Civil War Land Trust out of Washington purchased it. I got look, it pops out a little bit. But that is the main front where the Confederates had started making a little bit of a push as the day wore on. Now, General Forrest right here, he brought his troops up 431 chasing General Wilson. Schofield is coming. He's already set up in Spring Hill. General Hood is coming right behind him, trailing him pretty hot. General Forrest broke off from 431 on, if you know, Duplex Road. And at the time, it was just an old, like I said, muddy country road. But he broke off right there, I believe it was Mount Carmel, I'm sorry. Mount Olive sticks in my head for some reason. But Mount Carmel. And he took the majority of his cavalry and come towards Spring Hill. Well, before that happened, General Wilson sent a runner over to Spring Hill to General Schofield with the Union Army, saying, all the Confederate soldiers are coming up 431. They're all attacking from that side of the town. And that's what he thought. Until Mr. Forrest and several other generals showed up in Spring Hill. Now, this is one story that I have read, and I'm going to give it to you quick, and then we'll get a little bit more going on it. General Forrest rode up. Now, he's on a horse, and he's a proud man. He brought his cavalry up, and if you know where, I want to say it's Duplex Road and the road going over to the rec center. Commonwealth, no. Yeah, Commonwealth, right on the hill by the church. Yep. He rode up onto that ridge. And there was a general already there with some of his troops. And General Forrest rode up to him and said, "Sir, what are we doing here? We need to attack." The general looked back at him, and I do not remember his name. Y'all can kind of look at those maps. That'll help you out a little bit, but not much. But they kind of give you a little bit of the awareness of what went on in the movement throughout the day. But General Forrest said, "Them Yankees are not in there." The general looked back at him and said, "Sir, they are in there." And he said, "Well, prove it. Attack." The general took his troops, got his command, and he attacked. And sure enough, the Yankees were in there. The Union Army was in there, and ready, full battle, ready to go. Well, only two that made it out of that was the general and the drummer boy. Come back to General Forrest sitting up on the ridge. General Forrest looked at him when he got back. He said, "Well, I guess you're right. They surely were in there." And that's the kind of soldier, general he was. He was a pack, a hit. Let's do it. You know, we're at full blown battle. He would blow through a line, sword in one hand, just going at it. Now, shortly after that, the remaining troops were coming up from Columbia, and they basically come up along 31, the Confederates did, as the Union troops were still moving up 31, and they started half mooning around, if you can imagine, a half circle around Spring Hill on the east side, from 31 all the way back around to 65, not to 65, but out that way, and then back around to Rippaville in that area there. Anybody know where Brown Road is? It is an old dirt road, an old country road. I'm going to say probably about 70%, 60% of the Confederate troops come up through there. They had to ford the Rutherford Creek area several times to get to that point and to get over, you know where the experiment station is? The Tennessee Experiment Station, Agricultural Station? That road is directly behind that station, and they come up in there and they come right in behind Rippavilla, and then they spread out all the way over to Oak Lawn, and then all the way back around to the north side of Spring Hill, just south of Thompson Station. We had, the Union had cannons set up, if you know where Home Depot is, right across the street. Them cannons was all set up along there, so the Union had plenty of time to set up and get ready for what was fixing to happen. And General Schofield knew what was fixing to happen to him and his troops. So he had set his cannons up along that ridge. And when the Confederates actually started making their push, they started shooting their cannons at them. right here is just a piece of a cannonball fragment. Just a piece. That is I want to say a 12-pound Napoleon. Pretty close. Thank you. And it shrapneled out when it exploded into small pieces like this. Now, directly behind Coles, in another field that's closer to the parkway, we have found no telling how many cannonball fragments in that area. So we know that was where the main push was from, because that's where they were shooting. If not, why was there cannonball fragments laying? So this fight was going on. It went on all from probably 2:30 in the afternoon, 4 o'clock, somewhere right in there. And remember, we didn't have daylight saving time back then. So, November, it's cold. It's wet. It's sleeting and snowing. And these guys are trudging through the mud and everything to get to them. And Union's already set up waiting. So General Forrest, he's already done his due diligence. At that point, he had a little bit more to play in this. I'll get to that in just a minute. But he kind of kept them at bay, and he went up and he kind of went around and he cut everything off at the parkway, which was called the parkway, and it's 31, just north, and stopped there just about where Lowe's is. If anybody knows where Lowe's is, the ridge directly behind Lowe's, O'Reilly's Auto Parts, that ridge right in there is where he pretty much had his cavalry set up and had the whole parkway, or pipe as they called it, blocked off. The rest of the troops started moving in, and I don't have my paperwork with me, but if y'all will look on the left, I believe it was General Claiborne on the top left side, swung his troops around and done a left flanking maneuver. You can see the line drawn and it says General Claiborne on it. He done a left flanking maneuver and he was moving his troops behind the Union Army and trying to get them in, just all hemmed up in one corner, and they had them trapped right there. Well, the fighting went on and went on and went on. Once they made it through those fields, the Confederates made it through those fields, they broke what they called Bradley's Knoll. And Bradley had a huge amount of people and guns with him, and the Confederates broke through that line, hollering that Confederate yell. And the Union troops got up and took off running backwards. They were retreating, trying to get behind them cannons so they could get that cannon fire to help them get back into their line, because it's broke. It's to be over with. Now here's a little something that I read, and you may or may not agree with me, but I did read this in an old book, that during that little engagement right there, and it's McClutchin Creek, if I'm not mistaken, it runs right by Home Depot and right behind or north of the crossing. The Confederates had broke the line, pushed the Union back in towards Spring Hill. They were actually pointing their guns at them as the Union ran and was telling them, stop. Stop, you, excuse my language, damn Yankees, stop. And they wouldn't stop, and they fired. And then, all of a sudden, the cannonballs started coming again. They dove off into the creek, in McClutchin Creek, and they laid there until nightfall. And then they went back over into the encampment. Now, mind you, there's still troops trying to come up from the Union Army up 31 from Columbia, because Confederates all come from the opposite side. So there's still Union troops moving. Nightfall hits. Forrest had them cut off on the north side, close to Thompson Station, this side, right there where Lowe's is. all the rest of the Confederates was down here in Spring Hill. We had them, I say we, I'm a Confederate. I was born in the wrong time, but, I always thought, man, I could have changed everything if I'd have been there. But, no, I don't think anything would have changed, anything at all, no matter which way the war went. But when they got up into that area, it was all shut down, locked down. Forrest was like, I'm out of ammo. I could not fight without ammo. A bullet. I have nothing to fight with. He tried to get word back to HQ, get him some ammunition. General Hood. A lot of people want to say a lot of bad things about General Hood. They wanted to call him a drunk. They wanted to call him a general that didn't deserve to be a general. This General Hood had led many battles, Gettysburg, Chickamauga, and there was one other battle, I can't remember. Of course, it was Chattanooga there, and that Chickamauga and Chattanooga, above the clouds and all that. He was wounded several times. He had to be put up on his horse. He could not get on his horse by himself. And he still led his men through all that. Now, they say he sit over here in Oak Lawn that evening, just before dusk, by the pond, which is a big lake, and that's now known as Southern Springs. Oak Lawn is still there. I don't know if that's actually the pond, because that's about a 10-acre lake. It's not a pond to me. But they had him sitting there debating what he needed to do. And he said, we'll deal with the Yankees in the morning. We've got them surrounded. Somehow there was miscommunication between him and Forrest, because Forrest didn't have no way. He couldn't throw his gun at him. You know, he couldn't just holler that rebel yell and go at him and have him throw up the white flag and surrender. So everybody went into encampment. And General Schofield had all of his wagons. He pulled his cannons and everything out and went to the depot, which is off of Depot Street. Believe it or not, we had a depot here in Spring Hill once upon a time for a train. You can still drive down there and see some of the area that it used to be in. But there was about, I've heard anywhere from 600 to 800 wagons sitting there. He started his wagons and his troops moving slowly into the night, north towards Franklin. A lot of the troops of his were still coming up 31. They were wandering into the Confederate camps at night by mistake. And this is something else that I'm not going to say, yes, it's for real or not. Some of the Confederates poured them a cup of coffee and said, get your Yankee butt out of here. And give them a cup of coffee and let them go. And they sit there and waited. Now, Schofield, I believe he was a West Point guy as well. And is that me? That's all right. I love it. I love the ringtone. But Schofield he had already filled out, because he knew he was trapped. He was in a mouse trap. There was no way for him to get out of there, he didn't think. And he filled out his surrender papers to General John B. Hood. And I will pull the book and show it to anybody who begs to differ with me on this. He surrendered his sword to the lady of the house. And I think right now would probably be a good time for me to do one thing, and then we'll get right back on this. I've got a trivia question that I want to ask tonight. And the people that know me, don't you raise your hand because you're not going to get it. I'll give you another one that you'll probably not get. And there's only 2 people in this room right now that know this. I think the first question I want to ask is, does anyone in here know, and this has nothing to do with Spring Hill, but it really essentially did in the spring of '65, who was the last general to surrender their sword to the Union Army?
Johnson?
No,
Or Johnson? Sandwadi.
sir, come up here, please. Wait a minute, before you do that, can you tell me what nationality he was?
Cherokee.
Cherokee Indian, born in Georgia. Last Confederate general to surrender his sword. We had Native Americans fighting with the Confederacy. Sir, come on up here. I got a little something for you. I did not anticipate that happening. Everybody knows the history. Go back behind the table. I'm gonna go have a seat. That is knowing your history right there. How many of you in the room would have ever thought it would have been a Native American? Cherokee, born in Georgia. Yes.
Will you repeat the name of the general, please?
Stand is his first name, Stan, and it was either Waddy or Wadey. W-A-T-I-E.
Wait. That's got, Dana can give you a little more information. There's 2 tickets to go to Rippavilla over here and take a tour. And there's a little bit more in there, but I don't know what's in it. I didn't have nothing to do with that. Hey, look at that. Somebody knows their history. That's true. It's not that big one more thing in my head that I was actually going to ask that I thought, no, at the last minute I changed it. But I got into it a little bit when General Schofield was filling out his surrender papers to General Hood, because he thought he was sitting here in Spring Hill and was not going to get out of here. He thought he was captured. He surrendered his sword to, and help me with this, Miss McKissick, I believe, at the McKissick House was General Schofield's headquarters during the little skirmish here, battle here in Spring Hill. He had given his sword to that lady because he did not want to surrender it to John Bell Hood. But he did have the surrender papers filled out. He moved his troops all night long. The last wagon pulled out of here, Spring Hill, and the city limits was a whole lot tighter than they are today. So he didn't have far to get out of Spring Hill. But he creeped out 5:30 in the morning is the last wagon pulled out of here for the Union. And John Bell woke up, found out all this was happening, and they're gone. Because he said, we're going to deal with the Yankees in the morning. We've got them. He didn't. They slipped through the night. They just slipped right out of here. Now, I've heard tell they wrapped burlap around their wagon wheels and their county wheels and all this stuff. Hey, it's too darn muddy. These rebels, they were so tired of marching and moving from Atlanta to here, Ain't no telling what they was doing, but I guarantee you they were sleeping when this happened. And the next day they woke up and there wasn't a Union soldier left except for the ones that was laying on the ground. There was between the Union and the Confederate Army, there was about 850 soldiers mortally wounded or missing right here in Spring Hill. I've heard 1,500, but the books that I've read and the more studying I've done on it, it's around a little less than 1,000. So that kind of gives you a little bit of what really happened. And these bullets right here, every one of these come from right over here off the battlefield. There's a lot that was picked up, here, there, and yonder in Spring Hill, but 90% of these come from the battlefield over here. Behind Coles, I know they're getting ready to develop a lot of that area. And I hope, and I've heard tell that they are going to have a walking trail in memorial to the Battle of Spring Hill. And hopefully that will happen. And I trust my board of mayor and aldermen, and I'm gonna look right here and say, please save that for us, for future generations. Did that catch that? Thank you. But I want all the kids to raise your hands, anybody under the age of, let's go with 15. Anybody on the age of 15, raise your hand. Come right up here for me, please. All of you just stand right here and turn around for just a minute. We got one more coming up. Come on, Benny, don't kick him too hard. All right, now I want all of you guys, you ladies, to turn around. I want you to come right here. And I want, look at me, turn around. We're not taking pictures. This ain't no photo op. I want you all to pick one bullet out of here and hold it in your hand for just a minute. And pick it up and hold it in your hand, and I want you to turn back around and let the audience see it. Come on in, Dave. Bring it in. Sir, come on over here. Everybody turn back around. You get you one? Come on, pick it up and hold it. I want every one of you to hold it. I want you to hold it up. Now, I'm going to tell you something about that bullet you got in your hand right now. You are probably, I can't say for sure, the second person to hold that bullet in your hand since I dug it out of the ground and I picked it up and the soldier dropped it or fired it during the Civil War in 1864 here in Spring Hill, Tennessee. It still has the dirt of the battlefield on it. If you got a cavity inside, look inside of it. If it's got a cavity, that cavity has the battlefield dirt in it. Now, number one, you got a piece of history in your hand. Number two, it's yours to take home with you. Hey, let's tighten up. I know the loosens now, though. Kick one of all in every time. But anyway, that is pretty much about all I have. I know we're getting close to the 6:30 hour, or half hour. But if you got any questions, if I can answer them, I'll be more than happy to answer them. But we do have a professor in the house. You asked to come back up here and answer that question for you.
So what happened up in the Compton area where Forrest was as the Union troops were going north through the night? Was there any interaction with Forrest forces?
Not at that time. Forrest had already come back down to his headquarters, which was right off of Keever Road. And we have, this is kind of I don't even wanna get into it a lot with you, but we have a driving tour here in Spring Hill. It's hard to follow right now. Yeah, now hold on, yeah, Alicia, please.
So the Historic Commission, which Professor Powers back there is on, is working on two, related driving tours. Some of you may remember, and if you go by Jimmy's Cleaners, actually, that's the tour that's right now. There's some big, sort of low to the ground signs with a lot of graphics and text. We are working on replacing all of those and making sure that the script and the verbiage is more accurate. History has a way of uncovering itself as we go forward. The driving tour that Bill just mentioned is a numerical driving tour that ties to those signs for the most part. So you can be in your car and there's stop number 1 and stop number 2 and stop number 10. There's a trifold brochure that the Chamber of Commerce on Main Street actually has. We are also working on updating those signs along with the trifold brochure. And if you ask me when they'll be ready, I don't have an answer. But with all of the development, this signage is evolving. So for example, the former children's home property now known as Keegan Square on Keegan Parkway, where all of the apartments are going up, going vertical, that used to have, I think, 1 or 2 driving tour signs there. This has been taken down, but just know that it's a work in process, and nothing will throw me more than to be able to stand up here next to Bill and say, it's done. The other thing about that tour, though, is that when it was initially developed, it was focused on Murray County, because at that stage, Spring Hill's a Murray County town. We've expanded into Williamson County, but most of the signage that was done was on the Murray County side of town, so essentially south of Duplex. We now know that there were actions that took place closer to Thompson Station on the Williamson County side. So we're going to be working to expand the tour to include those additional spots.
So there's basically gonna be a new trifold or a quadfold, because it's a pretty good size illustration when they pull it out. And it's got a lot of good, interesting things on it. It's just very hard to navigate it with the signs in the condition they're in. They will be, thank you, Alicia. That's something I've been on, and I've been really hard on that for 10 years.
Trust me, he's not going to let me forget.
10 years now, but we will get it done. So when you come back, if you're not a resident now, if you are coming back to visit, hopefully in the next year, we'll have that done. You can take that driving tour. But Forrest had come back, to answer your question, Forrest had come back over to his headquarters, which was right there. Are you here in Spring Hill?
I'm west of here.
West here, okay. Do you know where the police station is off Keegan Road and the auto sales lot where they do the auctions? That was where General Forrest headquarters was, in a house which is no longer there. I have got some wood that come out of there from the guy that actually, him and his brother took the house down. Some old logs, and they're beautiful. But I wouldn't take anything from them. I cherish them big time. Yes, sir.
Didn't Forrest have a horse shot out from underneath them at the top of the station?
Sir, right here, this tells you everything about the general's map. You're more than welcome to come up and read about Rochester. Rochester is buried in Thompson Station. Roderick, I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm calling Rochester. It just seems like a more appropriate name. Roderick, maybe that was his second horse. How about that? But yeah, Roderick, and this has got all, you're more than welcome to take a picture if you can get it without the glare of the glass. Take this home. This is, somebody read the bottom of it for me because I didn't have my glasses on. Who was that read that and told me where it come from? The National Banner, I believe. Years ago, but it's right down here on the bottom. It says it, but it's got the whole story on the horse. There is a brass monument of the horse up there right now, still there, and the horse is buried. Nobody really knows where it's buried at, but they done the best they could do placing the monument there. And that was north of Spring Hill. it was in Williamson County. It was out of the Spring Hill city limits at that time, which now Spring Hill has expanded beyond that, well beyond that. Spring Hill used to be right here, just as you go over the little bitty hill by the funeral home and the cemetery there, right there at the bottom, the little bridge you go over before you get to Lowe's and everything, and Miles Johnson Road. That was the Spring Hill city limits right there, that place, that spot. And they call it Spring Hill a village. They didn't even give it a town. It was the village of Spring Hill. From all the documents and everything that I have read that are really accurate. And I've got the ORs, which are books that are recordings from the generals in the battlefield, sent back to their headquarters and wrote down, and they are documentation. You can buy them, I'm sure. They're very expensive books, but you can probably look them up online, and maybe Dana can get some in here and do a audio book or something like that on it, which would be great, Dana, if we could do that.
You'll have to do the audio.
Maybe we'll have to raise some money to do that, okay? But the ORs is where I got a lot of my information from. Old maps, an 1877 map. Can't hardly read this map. You got to go by the creeks. It does tell you where the houses were, who owned the properties, churches, major little things were there. But you got to remember one thing: the roads changed. The creeks did not. And the engineers back then were pretty darn good, considering what they had to work with. And they done some really good work preparing those maps, and they rolled over. But now, everything has just changed completely.
If you are beginning to study this, and in a novel, is there a book that you would recommend?
Yeah, and as you walk out, or if you come back in a later date, I would recommend, and this is just for the Spring Hill area, it's called The Confederate's Last Hurrah. And I've got a book out there in the library's case, that you can look at, and that is the book, but I've got it enclosed, it's wrapped up, and I'll never open that book. I've got a copy of it at the house, but that one I'm gonna keep, because I wanna pass that on to my grandchildren, okay? So that they know what's going on, and they have used a metal detector and found a bullet. Not one, but two granddaughters found the bullet, and it tickled them to death. But all you kids, I thank y'all for coming. I appreciate y'all sitting through this old man's little speech here, and I'm about to wrap this up. I'm gonna stand up here. If anybody wants to, if we got any more questions that I might possibly answer.
Comments. One, when he talks about the village of Spring Hill, 1 square mile. We're now at close to 30.
Yep.
In 30, pretty much 40 years. That's scale.
That's
Two,
how fast it is.
given that there will probably be some requests for metal detectors for Christmas now, I want to remind you, and Bill can do this better than I can, please recognize that private property is private property.
Yes.
Even if it looks like an open field and doesn't have a do not trespassing sign, do not metal detect unless you've asked the owner to do that.
Yep.
That sounds really obvious, but it's not, and there are people that get into fields with bulls and other creatures, and it makes the metal detecting experience a little awkward.
You don't want to be surrounded by a bunch of steers in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Because they do not give way.
Two, the driving tour that Bill mentioned, I forgot to mention in the first part of it. We're actually working on including QR codes, so that if you happen to drive past a sign and you don't have time to stop and read it, you can do the QR code and find it out. Connected with that, or working alongside that, we're also working on a tour of Spring Hill. Most of you know by now that between the Civil War, 2 fires, and a tornado, a lot of our older buildings were destroyed. But we have a lot of history here. It's a history of resilience, and we're working really hard to designate the properties that remain and make sure that you can walk Main Street. By the way, you'll find out why Spring Hill is called Spring Hill. Main Street looks pretty flat when you're sitting in your car. It's not flat. But that will also have QR codes and things out that you can do all at once or do in bits and pieces. The last piece I want to mention with the 29th of November coming up, Ricavilla will be having some programs out there. Please go visit. There's been a lot of changes in the last couple of years. It's missing some of the furniture and that kind of stuff, but the house really speaks to you. Imagine your own homes if you empty all the stuff, the story that the rooms and that the house could call. Seeing the original plank floors that were built by slaves. So please go out to Ricavilla. The last thing I want to mention, and this is maybe throwing some of us under the bus. About 8 years ago, the city of Spring Hill, the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, put something called Founders Day on the books. It is the first Saturday in May, which makes it May 4th of 2024. There's been some attempts to work with it. This is a hard city to bring everybody together. This is a great group to do that with. So on May 4th, actually May 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, on the Thursday night, we'll have our usual speaker series. Not quite sure who that may be. It may be Tom Price, who some of you have heard before, our county archivist. It may also be a young man named Brooks Lamb, who is from Marshall County, worked with the Land Trust, and has written a great book about farming and what farming means to this area. The Friday, we'll have another speaker, and we're also going to have a friend of Bill's and mine share some of his Spring Hill paraphernalia or collection. Saturday will be a larger day. We'll do a walking tour of Spring Hill, starting at the cemetery and talking about the residents of the cemetery who were also residents of Main Street. There will also be tractors and trucks and hopefully farm equipment at the library, along with the exhibit of Spring Hill items. And then in the afternoon, we'll move hopefully to Fisher Park and have some craftsmen, blacksmith, glass blowers. We might do pie eating if anybody wants to volunteer. But we're going to try and make this as much as we can about Spring Hill history. So keep that in mind. We're doing our best to put it together. It may not all come together, as these things sometimes don't, but we'll keep this group informed. And if there's anything that you would like to see there, maps or any other type of thing, please let Dana or I know. Yes, sir.
We've been longing to see photographs of downtown Spring Hill before the tornado, the old stores and things. Does the library have?
The library has, and I'll let Dana address it. They actually have a great history section.
We do, and we're digitizing it right now and organizing it, so it's still a little bit in flux. Several of us in this room are working on a book. And so there will be a book that you could purchase with all the pictures in it as well. We will put them online for you to view there as well. We just need to, the book is a fundraiser, so it's going to be a little while before we release them online. But then we will unleash all of it on Founders Day.
I want to add, thank you, sir. I want to add one more thing, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. I can talk about this all night long. But one thing I do want to add, does everyone know where the old Spring Hill Cemetery is? If you go into that cemetery, there's a lot of Confederate soldiers buried there. If you will drive in on the north or the east side and loop around and stop just before you go out back on the, is that Hugh Street? Macklemore. See, I get my streets mixed up. I was a kid back then. But Macklemore, before you drive out on Macklemore, you can park your car and get out, and there's a monument, and there's probably, I want to say maybe what, 30 stones that has been put up probably within the last 10 years to honor those soldiers. And they were Confederate soldiers, and it tells the story that monument does. And when you go in there and you stand and you read it, it'll give you cold chills reading about it.
Where is that? Where's that located?
Are you from around here? Okay, if you go back up, turn out of here, go straight back up, you know where Jimmy's Cleaners is, yep. Verizon, and you turn right beside Horizon, at that Verizon store. And you go down maybe a quarter of a mile, you drop down the hill, it's right there on the right. And it's got some beautiful headstones up, and it was such a tribute to those soldiers.
For those of y'all on Facebook, Mike Cooper is part of the organization that's taking care of that cemetery. It is not a city cemetery. They take care of it. They pay to have it mowed and everything. But he is on Facebook with Historic Spring Hill Cemetery, and he does bios on the residents of the cemetery, and they're very detailed. He has photographs for those y'all are interested in them. And Benny, stand up. Benny is part of our history group, and Benny has created a Facebook page and a blog called
The Ancestor Detector.
The Ancestor. If y'all want to find that long lost relative, Benny can find him for you. And if he really wants to get you, he will find your high school graduation photo and post it, you know. But those two things, he's doing an excellent job on Citizens of Spring Hill. He has photographs, and Mike Cooper does it and does the bio. And y'all can see where all these people are connected to the business and the home life, the churches in this town. So those are two things. If you're on Facebook, like those two things.
Ladies and gentlemen, kids, I hope you learned a little bit of something. I am no expert, although we do have one here. He caught me completely off guard. And I just could not believe that he knew. And I thought, I've got a question. I could have said, well, who broke the first hole when they come into Spring Hill? And he would have done it. Thank y'all so much.